Hi, I'm the poliovirus.
The poliovirus is a positive single-strand RNA Baltimore class 4 virus, which is surrounded by a protein capsid. Poliovirus has been shown to infect primates in a lab condition, but is human-specific in the wild. There are 3 different serotypes of the poliovirus, types 1, 2, and 3. These are antigenically distinct, meaning the proteins our body recognizes on the outside are all different, and they are different enough that an infection with one type of polio does not grant immunity to other types. The types also tend to be different in different geographic areas. With poliovirus 2 and 3 having been declared eradicated, poliovirus 1 is by far the most common. Poliovirus is transmitted from fecal to oral route, much like cholera, so the burden is heaviest in countries with poor sanitation. Infection with the virus provides lifetime immunity for the same strain, so infection prevalence is highest in children under 5 years old, mostly because once a child is exposed, they have immunity to the same strain for the rest of their lives, and most geographical locations only contain one strain of the poliovirus, so it's considered a disease of childhood. About 75% of people who get infected are asymptomatic, although these people can still shed the virus and be contagious. The incubation period, which is only for symptomatic people, is average 7 to 10 days, but can vary from 4 to 35 days. People start shedding the virus a few days before symptoms start, and shed for at least 1 to 2 weeks and what can be up to 4 to 6 weeks. People who do get symptoms experience a mild illness, including fever, vomiting, headache, sore throat, and potentially others. The disease caused by poliovirus is called poliomyelitis. Poliomyelitis is the disease that is caused by poliovirus, and it occurs in less than 1% of people who get infected. This happens when the virus exits the gut and enters the central nervous system, where it is able to attack your motor neurons. This can cause paralysis, and sometimes it can be reversible, but usually not. About 5 to 10% of paralysis cases are fatal, because it affects the diaphragm, meaning the muscles around your lungs are paralyzed and you can no longer breathe. It's usually the spinal cord that is attacked, but fatal cases are caused by the virus infecting the brainstem, which affects the cranial nerves. Even years later, poliovirus can affect you. Post-polio syndrome includes progressive muscle weakness, fatigue, and pain from joint degenerations. This tends to happen 15 to 40 years after infection and in about 25 to 40% of people who get poliomyelitis. When polio attacks your motor neurons, it doesn't destroy all of them, so you're left with a subset of functioning ones. These neuronal cell bodies will sprout new fibers, but over time, these cell bodies are working harder than they usually would, so they weaken and slowly die. Adults are more susceptible to a serious polio infection because children's nerves are better at regenerating. Babies under 1 year olds are not included in this because they have no immune system. The sporadic nature of sanitization is what leads to epidemics. If a population is really well sanitized, then there is a much lower chance that anyone will even come into contact with fecal matter and get polio. But these people are more susceptible to the virus because they weren't exposed as children to gain that lifetime immunity. The most efficient way to diagnose polio is to isolate the virus by collecting 2 samples of a patient's stool within 24 hours. Ideally, this should be within 14 days of infection. If paralytic poliomyelitis is suspected, a blood test should be obtained as soon as possible for serologic testing, where they test for antibodies against polio. A cure for polio is not currently available, so prevention by vaccine is the current standard medical practice. symptoms are addressed, with fever, headaches, and muscle pains usually being treated by painkillers and heat pads, and in cases of respiratory paralysis, even ventilators. Complete recovery from paralysis is likely, as long as the spinal cord and brain aren't involved, with physical therapy, exercise, braces, and sometimes surgery. An effective vaccine had to grant immunity to all 3 strains of poliovirus, but it wasn't even discovered that there were 3 strains until 1951. In 1953, there was a huge urgency for the vaccine, as cases were rising, and 1952 had the most cases the United States had ever seen. So in 1953, Jonas Salk announced he had successfully made and tested a polio vaccine. And in 1954, the United States has the biggest public health experiment to date, with over 1.3 million children taking part in the trial. Later, Albert Bruce Sabin created a live virus vaccine that he tested in the Soviet Union, where 10 million children were involved in the trial. The Sabin vaccine eventually took over Salk's vaccine globally. It had more advantages. It was a weakened virus vaccine, was taken orally, so it didn't need a trained professional to administer. It was cheaper, and it was more effective and longer lasting with broader protection. People who were vaccinated would shed attenuated virus particles. This would spread to unvaccinated people and lead to passive vaccination. However, this could lead to outbreaks, known as circulating vaccine-derived poliovirus. This could evolve to be more virulent than the wild type. However, the Sabin vaccine was a live virus, so 3 in 100 million people who were immunocompetent did develop paralytic polio. This vaccine was used until 2000, when it was recommended to go back to Salk's. One of the most famous examples of a poliovirus infection in history was America's 32nd president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, also known as FDR. He was diagnosed with poliomyelitis in 1921 when he was 39 years old. With no cure for poliomyelitis and limited understanding of the disease at the time, FDR was initially encouraged to get regular massages. This was later disputed by a different doctor who recommended hot baths instead. FDR found that he could still swim and did this to strengthen his muscles. He also wore leg braces and used a wheelchair and walking cane on occasion to move around. Always working towards recovery, FDR encouraged people to say to themselves, "I have lived through this horror, I can take the next thing that comes along." FDR was the first significantly disabled president of America, and he is an example of how poliomyelitis affected human lives before a vaccine was developed. So where are we today? The WHO estimates that 16 million people have been saved from paralysis. The Americas were classified as polio-free in 1994. The Western Pacific region, which includes Australia, West Asia, and the Pacific Islands, was classified as polio-free in 2000. The European region was classified polio-free in 2002, with India in 2011 and Southeast Asia in 2014. Currently, the only places poliovirus exists is in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. And hopefully soon we'll be able to say that it doesn't exist at all. And until then, we can continue to work globally for vaccine distribution and improved sanitation.
Thanks for watching.